Welcome to the Irish in Sweden podcast, my friends. A little bit late this week because I'm on the sickbed of Cuchulainn and feeling terrible sorry for myself altogether. My name is Philip O'Connor. You are listening to the podcast for the Irish community in Sweden. And as you can hear, there almost wasn't a podcast this week because I'm in bits altogether. But I have a couple of interviews done, so I said the show must go on, boys and girls. I was hoping that by today, Tuesday, I would have been feeling better, but I'm not. I've had a terrible sort of chest infection or some kind of crack there over the weekend, but the show must go on, and that is why I'm bringing you this interview now. Not going to be too much talk about what's going on in the Irish community. I will tell you there's a few things going on with the Swedish Irish Society on the literary front, and there's a book club opening up, and they're going to be getting together to read Ulysses and all that. But to be honest, I'm sitting here with a fever, so I haven't had the chance to pull all the details of that together. We'll get to that next week, and we'll get to Dorian Burke next week with also the great tips about renewing your passport and getting a new passport or applying for a passport for your children. She gave me some brilliant information about that, and that will be the subject of next week's podcast. For this week's podcast, this is a great time of the year because all of a sudden you find that, Christmas is over and there's a lot of events happening. And we've mentioned Seven Drunken Nights, the show about the story of the Dubliners, which is coming to Stockholm very soon. But I got a message from John Carroll to say that his cousin's husband, Cormac Moore, legendary Irish comedian, is coming over to play on these shores in the very near future. So I said I'd have to get in touch with Cormac and see what he's up to, and we'll put him out there. Stand-up comedy is one of my favourite art forms. So like when you see people getting up there and say, look, I'm going to be funny now for the next 40 minutes or 50 minutes or an hour or something like that, I think it takes great bravery, and the people who do it are tremendously skilled, and Cormac is among the very, very best of them. So I said I'd get in touch with him, and in the show notes you will hopefully find a link to where you can get tickets for Cormac's show, right? Before we go into the interview, remember this is a community supported podcast. It's supported by the great Martin Hessian, a fantastic man in our community, owner of Veerstrom's Pub. You will have noticed that the Six Nations has started now, and if you just happened to sort of barge up to the door last Friday just before Ireland beat France, you will have noticed it was hard to get a table. Get in touch with Martin, book your tables in good time, lads, for all the Six Nations matches. We beat France the other night. It was a great performance. There's every chance we're going to win another Grand Slam, giving a bit of a hostage to fortune there, but there you go. So get your tables booked with Martin. And of course the Irish Chamber of Commerce in Sweden have been very generous in terms of supporting the podcast in the past as well. You can do it personally if you go to patreon.com/Our Man in Stockholm. A $5 a month there will get you around about 100 podcasts a year at this stage, and I don't think that's bad value for money. And everything you do helps to keep me bringing these podcasts to you. And as we come up into St. Patrick's Day and the busy times of the year and that kind of thing, I really do appreciate the support from anybody who can do it. Listen, that's enough out of me because I'm about to start spluttering again. Here's Cormac Moore on what you can expect from his stand-up show coming up in February right here in Stockholm. So I got the message this week, Cormac, that you are on the way to these Swedish shores to bring us your stand-up show. How did the gig come about? Did somebody sort of, were they coming at you from all corners of the world trying to get you to come here, and Sweden won the bid? Was that it?
Lengthy briefing proposal process, and then it was finally awarded to Sweden. So that'll be this February's gig. No,
it's an honor. It's an honor.
And to be honest with you, I can't wait. It's been on my bucket list of countries to go to. Sweden has always been up there, so I can't wait. But no, just the guy who runs the gig, I just got an email at the start of the year, saying he found us online and was just like, "Here, do you fancy coming over doing a gig?" So I think they run a monthly English speaking comedy night there. So he just said, "Do you fancy coming over?" And I was like, 100% yes.
When you take on a gig like that, Cormac, because obviously, am I right in saying that your audience would mostly be sort of, in Ireland, in the UK, in English-speaking countries? Is this your first time playing a gig outside of the English-speaking world, so to speak?
No, so I did I gigged in Malaysia before, in Kuala Lumpur, and that was the one thing I was very worried about because, it can be very difficult playing to audiences and you don't realize maybe your Irish references or your Irish colloquialisms or your in-jokes, kind of like that. And it can be difficult. But no, I've done Malaysia. I played in Malaysia before and I was very worried about that, but it turned out to be great and brilliant crack. So I'm wondering, I've heard one or two things about the Swedish audience now, and you can tell me whether this is correct and right or not. I don't know if you've been to any shows over there, but I've been told before that they're obviously very polite, very well-mannered, wouldn't be as rowdy as Irish or, let's say, English audiences, and very much will sit and enjoy the show. But I've heard from other comics who've done Sweden and Norway, Scandinavian countries, that they nearly treat it as a movie, and that they'll sit and they'll smile and they'll laugh and they'll shut up. But from the comedian's perspective, it might look like they're having kind of sitting there. And then after the show, they're like, oh, that was amazing. Happy days. But for the, 20, 30, 40 minutes that the comedian's performing, I've heard, stories that it's just like, I'm dying on my backside here and it's not going well at all. But they're actually really enjoying themselves. So that's one kind of thing I'm anxious about, is that maybe they're not as animated or as I don't want to say rude is the wrong word, but the way Irish people like to get involved in a show and have the crack, whatever, and they'll interact a bit more. So that's the one thing. Are they going to be just kind of sitting back, taking it all in, enjoying it, but maybe looking like they're hating me? So I don't know.
It's very funny. I was reading an interview this morning in Elle magazine, right? Not a great man for the women's magazines, it has to be said, but it was an interview with the former Finnish Prime Minister, Sanna Marin. And the journalist actually wrote in the piece that none of my attempts at humor worked, So it's something entirely different. It's very difficult to impress sort of Swedish or Finnish people. I've seen Darragh O'Brien over here, people rolled in the aisles. And then there was the famous night that Tommy Tiernan came over with a show that was entirely improvised from start to finish, right? I still refer to it as one of the bravest things I've ever seen, but that was hit and miss. It is a little bit like that, but the other thing that Tommy said, Cormac, this could be interesting now when we talk about the kind of material that you do. When I was talking to him afterwards, I asked him, do you change your set? Like when you go to Malaysia, obviously you can't make too many camogie jokes when you're in Malaysia, right? So will you sort of sit there and go through your material and go, nah, that's not going to work. No, Brennan's bread, no, that's gone as well, Do you have to do that with your set? Or are you going to do what Tommy said to me when he always said, if you're going to see a blues musician, you want to hear that. You don't want to hear them singing about Donna Mead. You want to hear them singing about the Delta kind of thing. So how are you going to approach the set for that night then?
So it's funny you mention that, because there's a really good club in Dublin, right? The Stag's Head, which is probably one of the most popular, the Comedy Crunch at the Stag's Head, and it's on every Sunday night, right? And that is probably one of the most well-known popular comedy clubs. It's always rammed, but it's always full of tourists, right? So I would say like 20% of the crowd are Irish and 80% are traveling and holidaymakers and tourists and a whole lot, right? So they'd be from all over the place. And the first time I did a gig there, I had some material that referenced a 99. 99 ice cream cone would be known in Ireland and maybe in the UK, right? But the term 99 wouldn't be known outside of Ireland or England, right? And I had a joke, and the whole punchline was relying on that. And I just remember I died on my arse because no one got the reference at all. And I didn't realize that, obviously. It dawned on me afterwards. And then the next time I went back and did it again, I just changed it to a McFlurry. And they were like, okay. And it just dawned on me as soon as I had said it out loud in front of people from France and Spain and Germany. I was like, they've no idea what I'm on about right now. And they're, just this glazed look in their eyes. And I'm like, okay. But sometimes you have to die in your arse sometimes to realize that the change that you need to make. And then when I came back, and I just changed it from then on, I just changed it to like a McFlurry or whatever, because it wasn't really that important. It was just, it was just a comparison I was making between something else. And as soon as I started doing that, it was like, okay. But definitely, I think one of the things I've noticed over the years is that when you start off doing comedy, you are very much localized to your references and to the things because it can get a very good quick laugh. There's jokes about Copperface Jacks and you're like in the ga and all this kind of stuff, and it's like that all works fine. But as soon as you start being put in front of an audience not from your country, you've no material then. Do you know what I mean? And you're dying on your backside. You've absolutely no idea. They've no idea what's going on. So I've tried to make it more maybe it's more personal, less referencing specific, let's say, places or things. And like, because the show I'm touring at the moment as well, it's more about my experiences with making mistakes at work, or my experiences having awkward, inappropriate health scares and conversation with doctors. So I think the more personal you make it, the more universal it is. Do you know what I mean? So you don't need to talk about O'Connell Street, or you don't need to talk about Temple Bar or anything like that. You can just, the more you talk about your situations in life, I think that is what'll translate regardless of whatever country you're in. You know what I mean? Because everyone has awkward conversations with their father-in-law. Everyone has awkward conversations with, messing up at work, that kind of stuff. So I think that's what I've learned over the last while, is it'll definitely be, there isn't too many Irish references in my material, I don't think, anyway, because of that, because I know 100% that it's fine for an Irish audience, but if you're abroad, you'll just be standing there in silence, and it's it's not a fun experience.
Nobody's going to get any crack out of that kind of thing. It's fascinating because like there are sort of various different ways of approaching it. You mentioned the concept there and very open about it. The concept of dying on your arse among comedians. Everybody in comedy knows what that means, right? Do you take that personally, right? When you go and you do a gig and you say 99 instead of McFlurry and you just stand there and you give the punchline, there's no joke, and you go, does a little bit of you actually physically die inside? Or is it something that you go, you know what, that was
every
that night.
time, Philip. every time. And it's the only way I can describe it to you is, right, have you ever been, when you're down the pub with your mates, whatever, right, telling them this story that you heard and you thought it was hilarious, you're like, you'll never hear what happened to X, Y, and Z, and you're sitting around and all your mates are, there's like 4 or 5 of them around the table and they're sitting there and they're listening to you and you're going on, and then you realize you're not telling it very well and you're tripping up over yourself and they're looking at you and you suddenly realize that you're making a hames of this, right? And they look at you and they don't laugh and they're just like, what? That's horrible sinking feeling in your stomach where you're like, everyone hates me now, and I'm an idiot. It is the most uncomfortable experience in the world because it's such a rejection of who you are as a person. Because I've thought about this before, right? What you find funny is a reflection of your personality. It's a reflection of your even your political leanings, right? It's a reflection of everything, and you can't really hide what you find funny. It's a very unconscious thing as well. So when you're trying to make somebody else laugh and you get rejected, it's like they're rejecting every fiber of your beliefs and of your psyche and of everything.
You are a bad person, and nobody should like you.
100%. It's like everything about you is wrong and you're just doing it wrong. So it is, I'd love to say it gets easier with time, but it's still probably one of the most horrible feelings ever because you're publicly shaming yourself. I think that's the worst part is when it doesn't work, it's like you're publicly shaming yourself. And I think just as a human emotion, that's one of the worst things you can ever experience is when nobody likes you in the room. And like, you then just start, like, it's worse as well if you have a 2-hour drive home after a gig like that, you're left in the car with your own thoughts and they're just never great thoughts. You know what I mean? So you're driving home and you're just like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I even bothering with this? Blah, 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 blah. And you can start to just question your entire existence and your life choices and you're going, oh my God. But in saying that, every comedian will have a certain number of bad gigs, right? And I think that the more you go on, you start off, it's usually maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's you have more bad gigs than good gigs. And if you start kind of going and getting a little bit better and maybe getting a bit of advice off people, so half your gigs are okay, half your gigs are not okay. But then I think the more you do it and if you start taking it seriously and you kind of work on your set and you understand what's working and what's not working and you kind of build, maybe you started off with 3 minutes of good material out of 10. And then as the years go on, now you have 3-minute bits from 3 other sets and you can start kind of cutting the fat and chopping stuff away. So now you've got 3 or 4 stronger bits. So, you kind of get confident, that it works. So after a while, you might have a good 10 or 15 minutes that you kind of confidently know 9 times out of 10 is going to work, right? And it does. So you kind of start having less and less bad gigs, hopefully. But you will still have one gig to kick you in the arse and bring you back down to earth. And don't you be worrying about that. And I'll tell you, like, sometimes it's the location's fault, right? And that's a good way to blame it, is you blame the location or the venue you're in. And I'll give you an example. I was doing a gig with before Christmas with Pat McDonald, Owen McLove from Father Ted, right?
Yeah,
I've no Willie and the Jumper Guy, right? So Pat's brilliant crack, and Pat's a phenomenal stand-up comedian as well. If you've never seen him, his stuff is brilliant, right? But we were originally booked to do a marquee at the back of a pub in this small little town in Limerick somewhere, right? About 2.5-3 hour drive in the middle of nowhere. And it was like, it's going to be a marquee. It's a fundraiser for a school. There's going to be a couple of 100 people there. And we were like, brilliant. No brainer. Sign us up. We'll be there. So then on the day, it was like, listen, the tickets didn't really sell because the school who the fundraiser was for, they never sent out the email. They never promoted it. So there's only about 50 or 60 people coming. And then we got there, we were told, listen, the 50 or 60 tickets are sold, but only about 20 or 30 people are coming. So we're going to move it inside. And the gig, instead of being out in the marquee in the back, was in the front bar of a local Owl Lad pub. There was no stage. There was no light. We were literally standing under a TV that was turned off. The bar wasn't closed. The TV was still on. And in the middle of our so-called stage was the main door from the street into the venue. So me and Pat, and there was one other guy with us as well, we're just sitting there and you just know it's going to be a horrible gig. You just know that this is going to be work. This is going to be hell. That we were interrupting the locals' pints. Do you know what I mean? Like, and they were looking at us going, what the hell? So you get gigs like that, which are just horrific. Like, to be honest with you, it didn't work out too bad in the end, but it's stuff like that can really be awful when people are throwing on gigs and maybe they've never done it before and it just becomes the venue is setting you up to have a horrible gig, because it was, I just remember it being so awkward. You're just standing there and there was the ladies' toilets over to my right. So people were coming back and forth and the bar was open and and everyone was talking. You know what I mean? Because this is a pub, like this isn't a venue. This is just a random local pub. So no one was listening to you. So those can be really like soul destroying and tough. And they're like, these are the ones you're just going to have to take on the chin and take your shame and do it because you've chose this life in many ways.
Yeah. The great Joe Rooney, of course.
You get a few of them every now and then, and you have to deal with it. But
the great Joe Rooney, who's a good friend of Pat's, he was over here a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, around St. Patrick's Day, and he did a gig like that in a pub called the Liffey here in the old town in Stockholm, and it was in the public part of the bar. So the bar paid him, and there was you didn't have to pay in and that, you know. And he was the one who told me previously what you just told me there, how important the venue is, and having the right sound and the right light, and like having the right expectation from the people who are there, right? You're there to see stand-up comedy, so please kindly shut the fuck up and listen to what the comic is saying and laugh when you're supposed to laugh, you know. And that really, but Joe did a brilliant gig in very difficult. Now they weren't anywhere near as difficult seconds. I mean, it's bad enough being in Limerick without having to play there, kind of thing, you know. But when you get over here to a place like this, you know, do people know? Do you expect people to know who you are? Do you think they're going to look you up on YouTube? Are they going to listen to this podcast and have expectations of you, or do you expect them to show up cold and go, right, Mr. Funny Man, entertain me here?
So I hope they show up cold. I guarantee you they won't. Probably won't. Maybe, I don't know if they look online and stuff. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. I've no idea. But I think once they just are there, like what I've often found as well is my fear when I started off doing stand-up comedy, right, was that you're going into a room full of people and they're going to hate you, right? And that was my one thing, was like you're standing up in front of a room full of people. Presenting in front of people is fine because you're not trying to make them laugh. You can go through slides, you can talk about a thing, happy days. But trying to make a room full of people laugh is it's a big claim to be able to make, right? And I always thought that that's exactly what the audience would be like. That they'd be like, right, sitting there, try and make me laugh, idiot Irish boy coming over here, right? But then when I started doing it, I realized that most people, you have half of your job is done when people pay to go see a comedy night because they want to laugh. You know, they want to have good crack. They have already made the decision. We are going to comedy on Friday night. We're going to have a couple of drinks and we're going to enjoy our night. So they're not as confrontational as I used to imagine them in my head. If you know what I mean? They're not as like, oh, you try and make me laugh. Some people are. Like sometimes the English can be very much a bit more aggressive in the crowd, a bit more like, oh, when's the comedy starting, mate? And you're like, all right, relax. But no, I think it's usually they're a lot more receptive usually than what you think they're going to be. But even still, it'll be fun to see how a Swedish audience is or reacts, or if they're cold, if they're standoffish, if they take to us. Who knows? The funniest bit could be seeing the car crash. This could be amazing.
Oh, look at it. Like, you know, I'm going to say I may look at this show through my fingers, but it'll be entertaining one way or the other. You know, the other thing I have to say, Cormac, is Swedish people, they do know comedy, right? So when they watch, like Friends was a huge show here, but even before that, people here love Monty Python. They love that Dinner for Two thing, you know, that really old 70s physical comedy thing, and they show it every year, New Year's Eve, and the whole country watches it and this kind of thing. It's just like they see it every year, and yet they still laugh at the same sort of physical jokes and that kind of thing. So I do think that, you know, it is an open door you're pushing in. I have to ask the question though, right? With all of those things that you just said, right? Make me laugh, Irish boy, right? It's a big thing to get over, to say, I'm the funniest person in this room right now, right? Most people never get over the threshold, right? So if I can ask this, and I mean this with the best will in the world, what was it that made you think that, yeah, no, I could do this, I can get away with this? Was it the fact that you were the funniest person among the group of lads that you hang around with, or in your family, or that kind of thing? What made you want to do this?
It was weird, right? Because it's something that I'd always wanted to do in the back of my head. It was just something that I was attracted to in a weird way in my head. And I never, ever thought for years that it could be a possible career. Do you know what I mean? It was one of those like bucket list items that was in my head that said, I just love to give it I thought I could do it. I was like, I just would love to give that a go. Like I was always a little bit of a messer, or a bit of a class clown, for want of a better word. So I was always taking the piss and very sarcastic a lot of the time too. So I always just thought any gigs that I went to, I'd just be there. I'd love to be doing that. I'd love to be up on stage. I'd love to be trying it. And then, like long story short, I had started to set up a company out of college, right? And I'd raised some money and got some financing for it, and that all went bust, right? So a couple of years afterwards, that all went bust. So I was kind of living at home with the mother. I'd no money. I owed a lot of people a lot of money, right? And I just was watching Dave, that channel on Sky or whatever, at like 2 or 3 in the morning when they do the reruns of the stand-up. Sure, I might as well give it a go now, because like there was nothing else happening. So I was like, I'll give it a go. And then when I thought about doing it, the thought of it doing it terrified me, right? And I had never gotten that reaction before to something in my life. So then I kind of know, I actually think I actually really, really want to do this, because this is terrifying me. You know what I mean? Not everything else, but nothing else has gotten such a reaction out of me of actually trying to do something. So as soon as I went to kind of book it, I kind of shat the bed a little bit, and I was like, oh no, maybe I won't. And then I eventually convinced myself to text the guy who runs the open mic nights in Dublin. And then what's worse after that, he was like, Grant, there's a spot open for you in like 2 months' time. So I thought it'd be like next week. So I had to wait for like 2 months to kind of go and do it. And I went and I did it, and I loved it. Now I can't remember my first gig at all, because I was so like nervous and stressed, and I might have gotten a couple of laughs or whatever, but I just loved it and I enjoyed it. And then I said I'd give myself 3 years of seeing where this goes. And if after 3 years nothing happens, I'll get a real job, and I'll just, stop acting the maggot or whatever, and get a real job. So it was more of a case of not standing there kind of going, oh, I could definitely do this. It was more a case of I wanted to see if I could do it. Do you know what I mean? I was kind of like curious to see if I was able to in any way do it. The thought of it terrified me. So then I was like, I kind of have to do it now. And then I just kind of started doing it for a couple of years, and that's kind of been that, I suppose. So it's been going okay, relatively speaking.
Is it possible to make a decent living at a Cormac? Because there's an awful lot of people would like to do it, and even people who are very, very good at it, because Ireland's a small place, right? I mean, there's only, I think you probably mentioned most of the comedy clubs that actually exist there, with the exception of the Comedy Cellar and 1 or 2 others, So is it possible to make a living at it? Do you have to go abroad to places like Sweden? Do you have to go to London every second week, or Birmingham, or these kinds of places, in order to make a decent living at it?
Very hard to make it off touring, like insanely difficult if you want to do it. You won't make it off club gigs in Ireland at all, because there's only like 2 or 3 really that pay, and they're not going to get you on every week or every month. You know what I mean? So I was fortunate, like over the last 10 years, I worked in radio, which was kind of a perfect complementary career, if you know what I mean. So that was what was really fortunate to do that. And then the guys who are doing it full time, it is a case of, you have to go to the UK, you have to tour around the country. Some people now are making a lot more money when they're going down like the online side of it, with the online sketches and the online the reels and the TikToks and stuff. And you can make a lot of money if you get into like the hashtag spun, hashtag ad collaboration side of it. Like there is a phenomenal amount of money that brands are willing to throw at people who have built up a big audience from doing these sketches and stuff. But you won't make any money at all from club gigs. Your club gigs are kind of like your training for your own show, I would say. So if you do those as nearly practice for your own tour, theoretically you can, but again, it like everything, it's kind of like going into business for yourself. You think it's going to be fine. It's going to wind up being 20, 30, 40 times far more difficult and a hell of a lot more work. So I said I was lucky enough the last while. I did it for a couple of years starting off. I got a couple of gigs in radio, so that did me. And even now, so I'm working part-time in an ad agency at the same time. So I'm doing a bit of radio again at the weekend. So it's all, it's definitely not easy in any way, shape or form. And I think now it's more of comedians doing the online stuff to do it that way and getting across to the UK, and even just going into Europe. I know guys who are touring across English-speaking clubs across Europe as well, which is the kind of the main way to do it, yeah.
It's fascinating altogether. Who do you look up to in terms of comedy, and what's your process? Are you one of these people that Eddie Izzard famously said that he never writes anything down, which I don't believe for a single second. Billy Connolly says the same thing. Did you, when you had that 2-month gap before your first gig, did you sit down? Did you write scripts? Did you bounce them off friends and edit them and then get up and deliver them perfectly? Or did you just fucking wing it?
So a bit of winging it. So I've kind of changed how I write over the last number of years, because I used to get a notepad and I just jot down bullet. There might be something in that, and I couldn't even use lined paper or lined notepads because I was like too rigid or too structured, or it was just annoying me. So I used to just kind of capture ideas, and then my way of writing it or practicing, I just would be speaking it out loud or performing it out loud in my room, and just seeing how it kind of felt and doing it that way. I definitely wouldn't be scripted. So I would have started off being very much loose, being very much kind of winging it, exactly like you say, like riffing it a little bit, as you say. But over time, what I found is that approach it's kind of good, but over time, when you find out what works and what doesn't work, you're kind of writing it on stage a little bit, because you suddenly realize, when I said it this way, that got a better, clearer laugh. Do you know what I mean? Or when I phrased it this way, it's a better kind of joke or whatever. So you wind up sticking to the same punchlines and setups anyway. You might have a little bit of like riffing around it and a little bit of winging it around it, but maybe your punchlines have to be clear because they kind of work. So that's what I kind of think. The other way, like a few years ago, and started trying to be a little bit more technical with joke writing and comedy writing. And I read a load of different books on like how you structure a joke and learned. And then I started writing jokes like that, which would be technically correct jokes. But when I would perform them, they didn't actually feel natural for me, if that makes sense. So I was performing these like technically correct, nearly like Christmas cracker jokes. You know what I mean? Like there's a clear setup and a clear punchline, and they're like wordplay or they're like puns and stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, they're technically good, but I kind of don't do that approach anymore. I think it's a mix of both, because as soon as you start, what I found, if you start talking out loud and practicing a set out loud, you'll get other ideas while you're standing there performing, and stuff will just start falling out of your head, and you'll start vomiting out of your head, and you're like, oh, actually, that might work, X, Y, and Z, and you'll kind of write it down. So I'm more of a kind of bullet point kind of guy. Like even when, like my show at the moment is about 50 minutes. It's not scripted, but I have clear bullet points and sections of the show that I have to hit. But because I've done it in my head so much, or performed it so much, and kind of polished it from performing it, I know what the lines are, if that makes sense, especially for like the punchlines, and especially for that. So there's pros and cons to both of it, because a very, very scripted show can become, very good because you'll have your clear setups and your punchlines. My only thing with that is that, to me, that's not the stand-up that I want to do, because that's nearly like a play if you have scripted it word for word. To me, stand-up can be a little bit more conversational and a little bit more loose and a little bit more comfortable, because as well as that, what I find, if you have a very, very scripted joke or scripted bit, if something happens in the crowd or someone says something and throws you've no way to get back in, because you're like, it's just not natural. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, that has to go to this line, that has to go to this line. So I think being a little bit looser gives you a little bit more freedom to roll with the punches, so to speak, or have a bit of crack with the crowd. So it's definitely a mix of two. I can see the huge benefits now of if a joke isn't working, that you do script it out and you do write it out, and then you can look at it and kind of go, oh, it isn't working because this is here and that's there, and this isn't actually working at all. Like they'll say, one of the rules of writing jokes is that the punchline always has to be at the end of the sentence. So it has to be at the end, and maybe you've just put it a tiny little bit too early, and you're just not giving yourself enough breathing space, or you're not building up enough expectation or contrast or suspense or whatever it is. So those kind of things work. So it's definitely, I've changed over the years. I went from never really writing anything down at all to going the complete opposite way. I'm now still trying to find a bit of a balance between stand up and just talking shite and seeing what happens and capturing some ideas, and then having an option there to maybe be a little bit more technical with it to see if you can work it out, if that makes sense.
If I could ask you a very personal question, Cormac, what's the most Netflix have offered you for a special at this point in your career?
It's still a six-figure sum, but they're all zeros.
You never know. I'll try to get some executives to come to the show here in Stockholm. Let's talk about that now. So is it the 17th of February? Saturday the 17th of February, you're going to be here with us in Stockholm. Do you know anything about the setup? Is there going to be other comedians? Is it you coming out cold? Do you know anything? Has the club owner, the promoter, told you anything about what you can expect?
Not too much. I think there's a couple of other comics on, so I'll be headlining and closing out the show. So yeah, there'll be an MC. Jonathan, I think, is the guy who organised it, who booked me, and then there's 2 or 3, I think, other comics on before that as well. So you'll have options. That's the good thing. You'll have options of other comedians to see as well. So there should be a good lineup of lads on, and ladies, I think.
Is it a very competitive industry? Because I remember back in the day, there used to be, there's all sorts of things about people stealing material. The comics who are higher up the hierarchy might nick your best line. And in fact, it happened to somebody I know, and it went on to be a very successful routine that was just swiped in one of the, those cellar bars in Dublin. Do you find the other comics like Pat and that kind of thing, are they supportive? Do you help one another out? Tips about gigs and pension plans? Or is it very much, I'm going to keep to myself and I'm not sharing that with anybody?
I often find, I like to draw the comparison that for me it feels like, those like beauty pageants you'd see in America, where you'd hear these stories of their, girls telling each other they're fat and then they cut their dresses open and they ruin it. There is definitely an element of that, if you want there to be an element of that, right? From a comedy perspective, where, I didn't think you did well and all this kind of stuff. And and rob material and trying to undermine you. Like everything, there's definitely that. Loads and loads and loads of comedians are misfits. We don't have any sort of emotional intelligence or social skills, and we've landed up here in comedy land because we can't do real jobs and 9 to 5s. Do you know what I mean? Like so there's a lot of that stuff that can go on if you want it to go on. You can put your head down and just keep to yourself and ignore that and just do what you need to do and just crack on. Like there's so many comedy clubs after popping up now. There's so many people doing comedy, and you'll kind of just find your clique. You'll find the people that you like working with. You'll find the people you like gigging with, just like everything. And like my mates I've 2 or 3 really good mates in comedy, and they would be really supportive, and they'd throw you gigs when you need gigs, and I'd try to do the same for them. I'd be like, hey, listen, there's stuff going up. So you'll find your support network within your friends, just like anything. And you can leave all of the politics behind if you want. Like there's a Facebook group for comedians in Ireland, and that often descends into carnage and chaos, which is comedians bitching at each other left, right and center, and club promoters bitching with comics and acts, and then people jumping in, and it's just, sometimes it's funny, it's one of those things where you grab a thing of popcorn and you just sit back and look when you want to see what's going on. But it can be, it can be massive drama. I've heard, there's been voice notes left on bookers' voicemails, just absolutely abusive stuff. I was at a gig in Tallow with a lad, and he got himself in a round. He got a black eye at the end of the night. So there is that if you want it. Like everything, it's kind of like, you go into a company and you can just join the gang that bitches about everyone, and you can just fester in that little group if you want, or you can just put your head down, do what you need to do, and just focus on what you want to do, what you want to get out. Like everything, yeah, there's definitely an element of the Regina. Is it the Regina Doherty's? She's the politician. Who's the Regina from Mean Girls?
Jesus, I don't know. I've never seen it.
Right. Add it to the list.
Yeah, that'll be on the list. After I see you, that'll be the next thing that I absolutely must watch, I just have this vision of you sitting there in your shorts and t-shirt at home with a bowl of popcorn, and we're seeing somebody is typing, when you're just waiting for the next Facebook comment to drop in there, If I was to ask Pat McDonnell what kind of a comic you are, what do you think he would say, Cormac?
Oh, that's a very good question now.
Thank you. That's very
Jeez, that's a tough one. What would he say? What would Pat McDonnell say? Well, one, I'm a very convenient comedian for him because I'm literally around the corner from some about 5 or 10 minutes. So I pick him up and I can drop him to and from the gig. So very convenient and efficient. What would he say? Maybe he'd say very, very good at having a bit of crowd work, because I do like doing a little bit of that stuff. And maybe he'd say you should go see him on the 17th in February.
I think he'd definitely,
yeah. So I mean, I hope so. I hope he'd say that. It's a good question. I don't know. Maybe the convenience for having a car around the corner, and good with the crowd work and the hosting and the kind of MCing style of things as well too. I'd hope.
Yeah. I love my comics to be funny, and if they can't be funny, I hope they're convenient and helpful and good for a lift home. That's tremendous altogether. What do you hope comes out of this comic? Because this is, I'm not going to say it's a big opportunity for you, but there's a good community here. I'm sure many of the Irish people here who live over here are going to come down and see you now. Would you like to make this? Would you like to be one of those comedians who tours around through English-speaking clubs in Europe? Is that where you see your future? Is it the Netflix special you want to get into? Do you want to be a TikTok, Instagram comedian? Where do you think you're going to find your niche, so to speak, for the rest of your career?
I would love to be traveling around Europe doing gigs. Like if that was dream career scenario and you're doing that full time, I'd be like, unbelievable. That'd be amazing. And I would sell it to the wife as we're just going traveling. It's fine. You know what I mean? She loves her holidays. I'm like, let's just mix up the goals here and do that. No, but I definitely love to do that, and to be able to kind of gig full time completely would be the dream number one. You know what I mean? I think that'd be phenomenal as well. Netflix special and TikTok stars, who knows? And a decently filmed special will be a goal as well at some point. And if Netflix, want to hand you 40 million quid for that, you're not going to turn it down. You know what I mean? But to do it full time would be around Europe and around Ireland, would be phenomenal. Maybe a bit of TV and radio and some other stuff, and I have a few ideas for a few books that have yet to be written yet, so we won't reveal all yet. But the full time gigging, I think, would be brilliant. Like dream scenario, if you could do like 6 months of gigging and just break your backside doing that, and then take 6 months off, that'd be that'd be ideal.
We're talking.
But we're not there yet. Yeah.
But the first step en route to that world domination and 6 months on, 6 months off life, that starts here in Stockholm on the 17th of February. Cormac Moore is playing here. We'll include a link, and there are some early bird tickets that are available for 150 Swedish crowns. Lads, they might as well be giving them away, right? So as soon as you're done listening to this conversation, get on there, get your tickets booked, and we will see you when Cormac Moore comes on February 17th. And Cormac, if I may, I might actually talk to you when you're here as well. We might, record a minute or two of the show, and we'll have a chat and see if it did reach those lofty expectations that you have of the wonderful Swedish public. There you go. But for now, Cormac, thanks.
No, sorry, that'd be amazing. Like, if we're all sitting here and you cut back to this and be like, I think the gig will go absolutely fine. And then it just cuts to me sitting backstage with you going, oh, mother of God, ushered out the back of the club into a car going, never again. We're leaving Sweden.
Phil, you promised me people would come. Where are they, Phil? Where are they? But for now, Cormac, listen, thanks so much for talking to me. We're really looking forward to seeing you here on the 17th of February, my friend.
Thanks a million for having me, Philip. Cheers.
There you go. And after hearing that, lad, you should be queuing up to get your tickets to see Cormac Moore on the 17th of February. I know I'll be there, and I hope you'll be joining me. That is it for this week. A little bit shorter. Actually, while I'm on the subject of that, right? So myself and Aunt Morrissey and Molly Breed, we do be talking because we're forever trying to make the podcast bigger and better and reach more listeners, right? So myself and Aunt have been reading a book, and Aunt was given it as a present, I think, over Christmas, because somebody in his family knew that he's working with podcasts. But anyway, in the Heel of the Hunt, they were saying, what's the perfect length for a podcast? And some people were saying, 25 minutes is the average commute, right? Now, we started this podcast with short enough, and then it got up towards the hour mark, and sometimes Jesus went mad altogether, and today we're up to 35 minutes. So kind of need to know from you, what would you like? Because sometimes we pop in 2 interviews in one podcast, and that tends to make a fairly long one. Sometimes the interviews are half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. Sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. So if you could let me know, just send me a message on Instagram or anywhere you find me on social media, that kind of thing, and just let me know what works for you. Because as I say, we want to make sure that you get to listen to all the episodes, all the content. We want to make it convenient for you. If it works in your tunnel bonnet trip, or if you're Paddy Looney driving out towards Jimbo there, you might want an hour of a podcast that'll get you from sort of North Hull all the way out. What do I know, But do let me know anyway, and we'll try to take that into account in the future, because we're delighted to have the audience that we have, but of course we're always trying to grow it and make it better for you. Listen, I leave it at that for this week, lads. Hopefully I'll be feeling better next week, but we will, no matter what, next week we will be back with another episode of the Irish in Sweden podcast. Until then, take care of yourselves and take care of one another. Good luck.